My name is Erin Galloway. I'm the Deputy Director of Publicity for Berkeley, and I'm so thrilled to be your moderator this evening. We have quite a treat in store for you with 13 absolutely fabulous authors that I know you're very excited to hear from. A little housekeeping as all of you come in this evening. The only folks that will be talking are me as your moderator and of course all of the authors. So all of you attendees, if you would like to chat among yourselves, please feel free to use the chat function. You will find that in the very bottom bar of your Zoom screen. You'll see a little chat square that you can click on, and you're welcome to chat back and forth among all of yourselves. Right next to that, you'll see a Q&A function. And you can absolutely submit a question through there as well. I know you have lots of questions for our authors, and in fact, some of you already submitted some great ones. So we will try and get through as many as we can this evening. And for any that we can't get to, don't worry, we will send all of those questions to the authors. And then after tonight, they will start to answer some of them on their social media. So definitely stay tuned for that, especially their Facebook pages. And as all of you come in, I hope that you are enjoying a fine beverage, like many of us will be this evening. We won't judge whatever you're choosing to drink. For me tonight, it's red wine. For you, if it's something lighter or harder, good on you. Enjoy away. And I think since we're just after 6 o'clock, what I shall do is start introducing our authors so that you can meet them. And then we'll just keep the introductions rolling. So my authors, if you don't already have your video off, please, or video on, please make sure that it is on now. And I am going to unmute all of you for the moment, just so that you can say a hello, and then the screen view will shift over to you, okay? And then I will pop everybody back on mute in case children, dogs, cats, anyone else exciting tries to pop into the room where you are. All right, so here we go. First up, I would love to welcome Georgie Blaylock, author of The Other Windsor Girl.
Hello, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. It's very exciting to be here with everybody and get together with the authors and drink. Having a good time with that.
Absolutely. Next up, Janie Chang. Janie is the author of The Library of Legends.
Hi, everybody. And I'm drinking here from Vancouver, Canada, north of the border. So pleased, and it's going to be so much fun today.
All right, Chanel Cleaton, author of The Last Train to Key West. Please say hello.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming tonight. We're so excited to chat with all of you.
All right, Laura Camoy, author of My Dear Hamilton. Please say hi.
Hi, everyone. I'm really glad that you came out to hang out with us tonight. Really looking forward to this chat.
Eliza Knight, author of The Rebel Wears Plaid. Eliza, say hi to everybody.
Hello, and cheers to everyone from Maryland. So glad to join you all.
All right, Kate Quinn, author of The Huntress.
Hello, everybody. I'm quarantined in sunny San Diego, and thank you very much for joining us this evening so that I had an excuse to put on actual adult clothes, at least from the waist up. I've still got yoga pants on, and so I suspect as everyone else here.
That is a very accurate statement. Next up, Alex Rickloff, author of The Way to London.
I hope everybody is safe and well tonight. I look forward to chatting with everyone.
All right. Erica Roebuck, author of The Invisible Woman.
Hello, everyone. I'm quarantined also in Maryland in a different location from some of my other Maryland friends. I can't show you the cover of The Invisible Woman yet, but here is Virginia Hall, the fabulous, fabulous woman who inspired the book. It's really nice to be here.
All right. Next up, Jennifer Robson, author of The Gown.
Hi, everyone. I'm joining you from Toronto, where I'm hiding from my children and dog this evening.
There's a lot of us hiding and imbibing.
Yes, I'm working on it.
All right, Renee Rosen, author of Park Avenue Summer.
Hi, everybody. Greetings from Chicago. The book is set in New York, so I figured I would have a Manhattan. Cheers, everyone. Thanks for being here.
All right, Stephanie Thornton, author of And They Called It Camelot.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stephanie Thornton, and I'm joining you from Alaska. So it's only 2 o'clock here, so unfortunately just some ice water, but later on something a little bit harder. Really glad to be here.
And Bryn Turnbull, author of The Woman Before Wallace.
Hi, everybody. It's great to be here with all of you. I'm joining you from Toronto, and cheers.
All right, and then we're going to give this one more try. Carrie, author of The Girl in White Gloves. Do we have you on video? If so, say hello.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thank you, everyone, for coming.
Well, thank you all so much for being here. I know I speak for all of the attendees when I say that. And folks, for all of you that are here tonight, I just want to say that if any one of you is an essential employee, a nurse, a doctor, a healthcare professional, someone that is preparing food, someone that is volunteering, someone that is delivering, I want to offer you from all of us our deepest gratitude. So thank you for being here. And I just want to acknowledge for everybody that's on here, I know what a strange time this is. We all do. You know, quarantining at home is not something any of us expected to do. And I realize that that's also a very unique experience as an author right now. So I would love for each of the authors to share what it's like trying to write now, trying to maybe edit a book, research a book. I'd love to be able to go back and tell all of your editors tomorrow that you are writing away like mad. But I suspect that might not be the easiest case for all of you. So I would love if everybody could share sort of really what this strange time has been like. And I'd love if Georgie could start us off. So Georgie, you are unmuted and good to go.
Thank you so much. It has been a very unique time, especially in regards to having everybody home, because normally my normal day is get the kids off to school, come home, and it's just me and the dog, and we work until it's time to go do the school run, and then it's into the regular routine. Now it's all of that, plus my husband's working in one half of the room, we've set up a school room in the dining room, and then I'm still down in my office downstairs, and the dog loves it. He thinks it's great that everybody's home. For me, it's a little bit harder because, you know, having to balance the school with my work as well, because I'm working on my second book, which is tentatively titled The Last Debutante. Luckily, my research is pretty much all done, but I'm finishing up through edits, and yeah, it is very difficult to focus. I wish I could say that it wasn't, but it is. And you know, just a lot of it is just trying to make sure that every day there's that, just try and get in the zone for a while, you know, and just do the best you can, because, you know, we're all in that boat right now. I think even non-writers are having to deal with how do you focus on everything when it's so hard with the new distractions and the news and everything that's going on. So, but it's great to have an event like this where we can kind of get out of our usual routine, and as I think as Kate said, you know, do our hair and makeup.
Yeah, I suspect this is the first time most of us have worn makeup of any kind in quite some time. All right, so Jamie Chang, I'm going to call on you next to talk about what this experience is like for you.
Hi, everybody. So I'm kind of distracted right now because my book launches in Canada on Tuesday, and then 2 weeks later launches in the US on May 12th. So I've got 2 different timelines of marketing activities to juggle and work on. And if not for the miracle of spreadsheets, I don't know how my life would be organized right now. In terms of our home life, my husband and I, we've been working out of our home offices, being self-employed for quite some time, and we don't have school-age children. So in a lot of ways, we're fortunate in not having to make that sort of adjustment. For us, the adjustment, well, for me, the main thing has been expending so many brain cycles, trying to keep all the horrors of the outside world at bay so that I can work on the various assignments that I'm being given for marketing activities, and also to start working on my next novel. And I know that for all of us, being able to focus enough to start doing creative writing has been really, really tough.
Thank you, Janie. All right, so next up, Chanel, share with us how this experience is for you.
It's definitely been interesting, and I think it really kind of comes and goes in waves. The first few weeks, I just walked a lot and kind of read and watched shows. We binged Community, and I just really kind of didn't think about work too much. And then I remembered I had a book release coming June 16th, and I was getting all these emails about The Last Train to Key West from my publicity team and everyone working on the book. And I was like, oh, I need to get my work hat back on. And so really it's been kind of juggling this new normal of, you know, the news and kind of blocking out what you need to when you need to work. And also, I think for me, what's really been kind of relevant is we write about these characters that are living in extraordinary times. And, you know, I'm certainly sitting on the couch watching Netflix, so nothing like my characters, but it's really given me a lot more insight and appreciation for how they deal with the hardships that they face in the different moments in history. My book, The Last Train to Key West, is set in 1935 when the Labor Day hurricane hits the Florida Keys. And it's kind of one of those things where their lives are just completely upended by this event. And so it's been really kind of interesting to see it from that perspective and to appreciate history that way.
All right, I am going to send this over to Laura.
Hi, everyone. So I had sort of a strange 6 months because I had shoulder surgery in November. So I had already been staying home until about the beginning to middle of February, when I finally was at a place where I could go back out into the world and I was feeling up to getting back to work. And then this happened. And so I'm home again, and I am set up in my bedroom because my husband is using the home office on our first floor for his work. And so I have a folding table with a kid's llama sheet on it. And so I pretty much live in the like 20 steps between, you know, here and my bed a lot of the day, and get lots of visits from the dog and the husband and the children. When the kids come in with notes like this, it reads, "Hello, Mother. You are the best mom ever. I have never seen anyone with higher intellect. Wow, amazing. 10 out of 10, your loving daughter." I think this particular note was to get some coins or something for a game. So, you know, lots of like moments like this happening. But I'm trying to get myself focused and organized on a new research project. It'll be my first solo historical. I've done Founding Mothers of the Revolutionary Era with Stephanie Dray, and we're going to keep doing that. But I'm also working on my own solo novel at this moment. So luckily, writing is the kind of thing that one can do from home, but certainly the challenge of focusing and not being distracted, not just by, you know, sort of stuff going on in your house and the fact that we're all here, but of course, everything that's going on out in the world. And it seems a petty thing to even mention, perhaps, given all the things of bigger import, but my workday usually took place in a booth at Panera, which is where I would go to write and work every day. So I am missing my Panera iced tea very much right now. And so at least Prosecco offers a little solace from that. So that's my experience.
Thank you, Laura. And I just want to put out there for everyone that I would really respond to bribery along those lines. I don't have children, but I would love to receive those kind of notes about my wonderful intellect and anything else that they want to praise. So you taught your children well, Laura. All right, next up, Eliza.
Hello, everybody. I just want to say I love that note that your daughter wrote you. That's hilarious. So things here are a little bit, well, like a lot different. My husband was set to come home from overseas where he works at the end of March, and obviously that didn't happen. His position there is essential, and they were worried he wouldn't be able to get back. So I'm sort of like doing this on my own, which has its own amount of suckage attached to that. Our oldest daughter is home from college. They shut down the college, but they're doing distance learning. So that was really interesting for her. She's really, really smart with science and math, but not so good with computers. So trying to help her figure out all the Zoom and everything has been a great lesson. And then also my two younger ones are in middle school and elementary school. I have become really proficient at 4th grade math, not something I ever thought that I would be reliving, other than like, oh, great job on your homework. Now I have to check answer keys and be like, well, you didn't show your work here. And I feel really strange doing that. So that's been really different. The other thing is I've had to shift my workday. So I used to start writing at 9 a.m. when the kids would all be finally off to school. And I tried doing that the first few days they were home, and they were having dance parties right outside of my office door, like begging me to come play and, Mom, let's do this. So I've started writing at 5 a.m., which I'm normally a morning person, but not that early. That's the middle of the night. So I write between 5 and 9 a.m. now, and no one's awake. And then I actually am finding that I'm way more productive, which is really weird. So I'm done with my words by then, and I can do math and computer stuff and all of that. And then in the afternoon, I can get back to the computer to do things that don't require as much brain power as writing, like promo and edits and things like that. So that's been really, really different. I'm sort of like literally everywhere in the whole publishing process. I just finished a first draft this week that's due next week. And this week I also got a new book deal for a historical fiction novel, The Little Mayfair Bookshop. So I'm super excited about that. Also in the process of editing a book that's coming out later this year. And we are all always promoting everything all the time. So it's like really hard balancing all of that, but I have a nice planner. I'm a huge Erin Condren fan, so that's that.
All right, thank you. Next up, we have Carrie Mayer.
Hi, I just want to make sure everyone can hear me. Is that everyone? Yes. Okay. You know, I just want to echo things that everyone is saying. You know, my work day used to also start when my daughter would go to school. I would give the dog a quick walk and get down to business with my second cup of coffee. I am also getting up earlier than I used to in order to do exactly what Eliza just described. I have not joined the 5 a.m. club yet, though. More power to you. But I am getting up earlier than I normally would in order to kind of get the work done, the writing, the focused writing done while the house is still quiet, either while Ellen is with her dad or she's with me and she has, you know, sort of free screen time, which keeps her quiet and occupied for a while in the morning. And also, you know, Chanel, I'm so glad you said that about like things that we're sort of learning about characters we've already written. I had this moment, you know, I wrote my first novel was set during World War II, and I had this moment after grocery shopping of thinking about rationing and like the things that I'm rationing and that I'm not using in the same way, or that I'm parceling out in small amounts. And so I also have gained a new appreciation for people living in other times that, you know, who knows, I might write another novel set during World War II and I'll have a different perspective on that now.
Right, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Kate now.
Hey, everybody. I really feel very lucky in this time period. At least I try to remind myself to feel lucky. And part of that is because I do not have children that I am required to homeschool. The dogs are ecstatic to have me at home. I have not had to relearn 4th grade math or figure out how to log into a virtual classroom. And I've not had to rearrange my writing schedule for that account because of having to take into account the school day. And I get to stay home. My dogs are here. My husband is here. Fortunately, he's active duty Navy, and he was deemed very early on by his command to be in the at-risk category because of a bout of pneumonia in January that nearly killed him. So thank goodness he is home with me, and we're in quarantine together. And I'm also feeling very lucky because I'm in the editing part of the cycle. And that is, I'm not even in heavy duty editing. I'm in, rather nitpicky, smaller edits and polishing. I have really felt for the authors who have had books release in the middle of this, or like Stephanie Thornton with her Camelot book, or the authors like Janie and like Chanel who have launches coming up. I have really felt for you guys, and because I know it is hard to be heard in this online buzz that we are in the middle of. And I really felt also for those who are trying to draft rough drafts in all of this, because I don't know about you, but I have the attention span of a goldfish since all of this got started. Dory from Finding Nemo looks like, a Mensa scholar right now. She can concentrate longer than I can. So I'm trying to edit, and I'm finishing up edits right now in The Rose Code, which is my book about the women of code breakers of Bletchley Park. It's been, I have to say, kind of tough, and that's because, in the middle of all this, it is really rather difficult to look at your Word document and think, yeah, but I don't really care right now about deepening my heroine's emotional arc. I just don't care at all. And the thing is, though, is that this book comes out a year, and I will care very much in a year if I have not given my absolute best to it. And if I look back and think, I could have made this book better for all those readers who are looking forward to it. So that's my job right now, is to do my best by you. And I am, by God, I'm trying to do it. And I'm also plotting out a new book right now, I will say. And I can't say much about it, about who the heroine is, but she is an amazing historical female badass, and I cannot wait to tell you more about her later.
Such a tease, isn't she? All right, next up, over to Alex.
Hi, everybody. Like Carrie said, we're all kind of dealing with the same sorts of issues and problems that have come up since this whole quarantine started. We've been very fortunate here. I'm quarantining with my family, so there's 5 of us kind of trapped together in the house. My husband is able to pretty much telecommute and work from home. So we haven't had to deal with a lot of the hardships that a lot of people are dealing with right now. I do have 2 sons who are dealing with the distance learning in high school, one more conscientiously than the other. And then my daughter, who's in her early 20s, unfortunately had to move back in with us when her employer closed. And she was kind of less than enthusiastic. And actually, I'm in her nest up here in the attic that she's sort of made for herself to just be able to get away from everybody. At this point, I think I'm very much thankful for the internet and a house big enough that we can all close doors when we need to. One of the things that you all were talking about was changing your writing schedules and having less time with all your kids home. And I found that I'm actually reverting to how it used to be when my kids were really small and I was writing. When I started when my youngest was still less than a year old, and I found that actually I was much more productive because I was stuck doing these tiny little, almost like these writing bursts of, you had 15 minutes where everybody was fine and you got as many words in as you could. And then they, cried or they fell over or you had to deal with some baby issue and you had to stop. But I'm finding myself kind of drawing on that experience this time around. Obviously, I don't have so much crying, but definitely having people walking through rooms or asking me questions or wanting to know what's for dinner. And I don't know about you, but I feel like that's all I have been doing for the last month and a half is trying to figure out what to eat for dinner. So that's how I've been dealing. Luckily, in terms of writing, I'm at the very early stages. Well, I have one book that's sort of out on submission, so it's out of my hands and I don't have to think about it right now. The other one, I'm in the very early stages, so still sort of pulling in a lot of research, pulling sources together and outlining. So I haven't had to do a whole lot of hardcore drafting yet, but that's so luckily for me, and I'm definitely not one that's got one coming out. I feel for Janie and Carrie and everyone, Stephanie, who are having to deal with all the crazy the way things are now and having, you know, so many events canceled and postponed and things like that. So that's how I've been dealing with the quarantine. So far, so good.
All right, I'm going to turn it over to Erica.
I have 3 sons. I have a 17-year-old graduating senior, so that's been interesting. I have a 15-year-old, and those 2 are musicians. There's a lot of guitar and piano in the house, which is not normally happening during the day. And then I have a 12-year-old. He's a TikToker, so, you know. So having them all home has been very difficult, just for my concentration. In the beginning, I was circling and circling, and then finally, I just set them to work when I went to work, and we all started to fall into our routines. I started finishing with copy edits for The Invisible Woman, which is much easier than drafting because it's very technical and you can dip in and out. But now I'm back to drafting my new book, and I didn't know how I was going to do it. But then I realized it's set in December. It's starting in 1940 as civilization is slowly being shut down and rationing is getting tighter and government restriction on movement. So I've been able to channel all of it. And so it's actually a lot more authentic than it would have been. I'm not happy to be doing this, but I can at least put it all into the work. And not only that, my husband, he's a guy, you know, he built a chicken coop for us last year. So we have chickens, we have farm chores, we're able to collect eggs and, you know, imagine what it would be like with real rationing going on. And I'm the rationing police. And my 12-year-old said the other day, Mom, not everything's about World War II. But right now for me, it kind of is. So I just try to put all of that into the work so that people can connect to it. You know, my emotions, some days I feel really hopeful and then I feel terrible. And it's just this constant cycle. But again, I feel lucky. I can just put it all into the work. And I think that, you know, it's probably made this more authentic than anything I've ever written. So.
All right, thank you. I'm going to have Jennifer answer next.
Hi, everyone. You know, I'm just, my experience has been a kind of a mix of what everyone has cited. I have teenagers at home who are loud at the most inconvenient moments. I have a very darling husband who's working from home, who is a very soft-spoken man, but somehow when he goes on conference calls becomes very shouty and loud, and it's very hard to escape from, even with, I've even tried earplugs, the soft ones, and then noise canceling headphones on top, just to have my little zone of quiet. But, you know, I've been working away on the final edits to my next book, which is called Our Darkest Night, and it's set in Italy in World War II. And my descriptions of life on, as it were, the home front are drawn from memories of my husband's family who lived through that period. And, you know, as I'm going through, I'm just doing the final revisions. I promise to, if my editor happens to be listening, I swear they'll be done by next Friday. I promise. As I'm reading through descriptions of what people had to eat, and that's to say very little, very, very little. They were hungry all the time. And they really made use of everything they had. I am struck once again by how fortunate I am right now and my family. I feel real gratitude that we aren't struggling like so many other people are. And it is making me, just as Erica was saying, very vigilant about food waste at home and all of my latent pioneer instincts. I worked at a living museum, a little bit like Colonial Williamsburg, but set kind of, the setting was the 1830s pioneer time in Canada. I worked at that job through my teens. So I am a good person to be stuck in quarantine with in terms of making do. So my big project, apart from writing, which is the main focus, but I'm one of those annoying people who started making sourdough. And it is so good. This is one of today's loaves. I had to hide it because the children eat it as fast as it comes out of the oven. And that's been very satisfying. But, you know, it is strange to be writing about a period that in some ways has so many parallels to what's going on now. And, you know, I just wake up every day and thank my lucky stars that we're okay. And I guess the next question is, how do we help people who aren't? So that's something that's an unanswerable, but we're working on it, I guess.
Now, Jennifer, I don't think I've ever said this to anyone before, but I would absolutely steal your sourdough. I'm now going to turn it over to Renee.
Hi, everybody. So I am right now in the final, what I hope are going to be the final stages of the edits on my new book. And I'm also trying to find a title. So if anybody has a title out there for a Gilded Age novel in New York, bring it forth. The one thing that I've noticed in terms of this whole quarantine is that this is an edit that should have taken me a very short period of time. And I've been reaching for every word. And, you know, John is my like human thesaurus because I can't find the words. And I've been very emotional lately. Now, I'm not a crier. I used to be, but I think I dehydrated myself in the 80s. And so now that Dove commercial comes on, you know the one I'm talking about, and I just want to burst into tears. A song comes on, I want to burst into tears. And I'm finding that there's so much sadness in the world right now, and it, you know, it wants to find its way into my work, right? And my challenge is trying to keep it out and, you know, stay true to finishing up this book as it's supposed to be. And it's been a struggle. And yeah, I don't know what the world looks like when we crawl out from under this, but I'm really anxious to see. So,
aren't we all? Stephanie, I am turning it over to you.
Hello, everyone. So as you heard from some of the other panelists, my book, they called it Camelot, came out mid-March, just as everything was falling apart. So it's been really interesting doing book launch stuff online. I feel like I am a Zoom expert at this point because by day I'm a high school history teacher. So I've been jumping into distance learning, and I have a 13-year-old daughter, and fortunately she really likes to learn. So I've kind of just let her be. I think she's gone feral. She's on the other side of the house, but she's turning her assignments in, so we just call it good. And I'm also editing my next book. My deadline, I feel like Jen Robson and I should have a party on Friday because my deadline is also Friday. And I am determined that that book is going to hit my editor's desk. And in the meantime, I am also stress baking. So we also just started a sourdough starter last week. Its name is Martin. I don't know why my daughter picked that out, but I'll be making sourdough loaves at 10 o'clock tonight because I might have missed the direction that it had to sit in the refrigerator for 8 hours today. I thought I could just put it straight in the oven, but for baguettes, I guess not. So it's a big adventure, the whole thing.
All right, thank you, Stephanie. I'm now going to turn it over to Bryn.
Hey guys, really great to be here with all of you. Yeah, it's been a wild few weeks. I live on my own, and when all of this was starting, my parents called me up and said, "You are not, like, you cannot be alone. We know you too well. You are too social. Come stay with us." So thankfully, I'm at my parents' place up in their attic right now, and I've had to do like a makeshift workstation. So right now, my desk is actually a dresser, which you know, is okay. My knees aren't taking it all that well, but that's you know, that's life in quarantine. I am, you know, as we mentioned earlier, my book comes out in July, The Woman Before Wallace. So I'm trying to figure out what that book launch is going to look like. You know, we have really no idea what is going to happen in July. So I guess we'll see where that's going to go. And I'm also working on my second book right now. One really good thing about having all this time is I actually ended up completely sort of throwing out what I had done for my second book. I was sort of 200 pages in and decided to revamp it. Spoiler alert, it now has an epidemic in it. Can't imagine how that came to my mind, but no, it's been, you know, I'm writing a lot. Thank God for workout videos. That has been like my saving grace for sure. And long walks with my dog, so.
Thank you, Bryn. And now what I am going to do is first say a huge thank you to every reader on the call tonight that submitted questions, because many of you submitted questions when you registered to participate tonight. So I just want to thank you, because these questions were fantastic. The authors were very excited when they read through them to see what you had asked. So I'm actually going to begin with Georgie tonight, and I'm going to read the question off to her now. So Georgie, what is the oddest or most unusual bit of information that you've come across while researching your books? And how do you know when it's time to stop researching and just start writing?
I think one of the most interesting things I discovered when I wrote The Other Windsor Girl, which is a book about Princess Margaret, is how intrusive the press was even in 1949 in her life. People always think that the way the press was with Princess Diana was somehow unique, that it only really happened then, or it began at that time. But the truth is that Princess Margaret was the Princess Diana of her era, and the press was just as intrusive. And the most interesting fact I found about that was there was this, she took a vacation to Italy in, I believe it was 1949, and she was on the island of Capri, and she was swimming in a flesh-colored bathing suit. And there were photographers perched as close as they could get with telephoto lens, taking pictures of her and saying, Princess Margaret swims nude. And if you actually Google it, there's an article in Life magazine about it. And we always think about that kind of thing as being, you know, sort of a modern invention, but it wasn't. And that, I think, is what startled me the most, because she was the Princess Diana of her time, and she was treated in that regard. And in regards to when I stopped doing research, a lot of times it's get enough to be able to write and then go back and then fill in more of the details to really flesh it out. So, you know, I'll get every book I can about a subject. I'll do as much research as I can. But sometimes it's just literally to the point where it's like, okay, I know enough to be able to write this scene or write what's going on or know about kind of the world that they're in. Write that scene, and then when I come back later, if I need to, really fill in the details. So it's that sort of balance, like just enough to keep going, to keep it real, to keep it the way it needs to be without getting lost in the research. Because I'm a history geek. I love history. I'm sure we all do. And it's so hard not to get lost in it and to not want to include every single detail that you spent a lot of time researching, because that hurts too when you do a bunch of research and you think, oh, this is wonderful, and then you're like, oh, this really isn't helping the story any, and so I have to get rid of it. And it's, you know, it's fascinating information, but it's hard to let it go. So you know, there are times you have to go really deep for something depending on a scene, and then other times it's just enough that you can continue writing, keep the momentum going, and then come back later and fill in more details if you need to.
Thank you. The research questions were very popular amongst many of the readers tonight, and I think you must all be able to tell that so many of these authors really love the research portion. So I actually have a similar question for Janie. Janie, what's the oddest or most unusual piece of information you have found while researching? And for you, what is the stage when you go from let's research some more to it's really time for me to start writing?
Well, you have to know that because we are history geeks anyway, we could kid ourselves that we are doing productive work while we are going down multiple rabbit holes of research, and we actually haven't written a single word yet, you know? I give myself about a 6-month time period of off and on to check out whether or not the time period I'm researching, there's enough plausible events that the timeline is going to work and I can actually write the story. For the Library of Legends, sorry, I keep putting it up because like I have no book launch events, you know. For the Library of Legends, I always knew that the premise was going to be the evacuation of Chinese universities during the Japanese invasion of China. And this was when my father and his classmates actually packed up their campus and they walked 1,000 miles to the interior of China, where the university was given an interim campus. But dozens and dozens of Chinese universities fled to safety in this way. So there I am researching. And what I came across was mention of a university that carried with them, while they were walking, that carried with them these 300-year-old books that they had rescued from one of the former imperial libraries. And these books actually made it through the Second World War and came out the other side safe and sound. And when I read about that, a number of things happened. I thought, wow, that is such a terrific such a metaphor, and it's so symbolic, and it can carry so much with it about legacy and the importance of books and our cultural heritage. And it actually ended up being turned into the title of the book, which is The Library of Legends. And that was just such a little tidbit that I came across. And the more I looked into it and thought about it, the more significant it became in writing this novel.
Thank you. Now, Chanel, could you share with us some more about what your connection to Cuba is and how the characters in your books came to life?
Absolutely. So I'm Cuban American. My family came to this country in 1967 as refugees. They lived in Cuba for about 8 years after the revolution and then decided to come to the US. And really, like so many Cuban Americans of my generation, I grew up on their stories and their memories of home and their love for their country. And so I really wanted to tell a story that was a multi-generational story. When I first started writing Next Year in Havana, I was really close to my grandmother, and I wanted to kind of capture the essence of that relationship and how much that meant to me. And at the same time, my dad told me a family story that I hadn't heard before, of a night before they all left Cuba in 1967, when everyone met kind of under the cover of darkness in the middle of the night and in the backyard buried all of their valuable belongings. And that was sort of a common practice in Cuba at the time. People would kind of put them in the walls of their homes. They would bury them in the backyard because you really couldn't take anything with you when you left the country. And so as a writer, when I heard that story, I was just really inspired. And I was left with the question of, if you were forced to leave the only home you'd ever known and you didn't know when you'd be back, what would you save until the day that you could return? And so that's really what kind of prompted me to start writing about my heritage. At the time, I just thought it was going to be Next Year in Havana. And then I really fell in love with the Perez family and with the characters. And so I wrote one of the sister stories, Beatriz, and now I have The Last Train to Key West, where I'm kind of going back in time. And so we're going to the 1930s and seeing what kind of cultural intersections you have between the United States and Cuba at that point in time. So I'm really loving, while they're very much fictional characters, they're very inspired by kind of the essence of what it is to be Cuban that I always kind of grew up with. And also it's just given me this really interesting opportunity to explore my own history and cultural background. The book I'm currently editing right now is called The Most Beautiful Girl in Cuba, and it's going to be out in 2021. And it's based on a real life Cuban heroine, Evangelina Cisneros. And it's just been really fascinating to kind of walk through these periods of history. It's during the Spanish-American War and when Cuba was fighting for independence. And it's not something I knew much about. Really, my family didn't even know that much about it, even coming from Cuba. So I love kind of getting to explore more and to walk through history with these characters.
Thank you. So Laura, I have a question for you next. Do you ever find the need to bend or assume facts because there's a blind spot in your research? And if so, do you indicate these with a note, or is it kind of implied that creative authority is needed to paint the full picture?
So I think the short answer is yes, that you take that kind of dramatic license all the time. Now, how frequently you do it, I think, depends a lot on the specific project that you're working on. I write a lot of biographical historical fiction, which is historical novels about real people. So the details of their lives are often known, but not necessarily all of the specifics. Especially, this is one of the challenges of writing women's historical fiction, is that when Stephanie Dray and I wrote America's First Daughter about Patsy Jefferson and My Dear Hamilton about Alexander Hamilton's wife, Eliza, there were 18,000 or so letters about Thomas Jefferson on the National Archives website, and there were about 8,000 letters about Alexander Hamilton on the National Archives website. But for the women in their lives, there were about 700 letters about Patsy Jefferson and about 220 letters about Eliza Hamilton. So significantly different body of evidence for the women's lives. And so you do have to decide what for you and for this particular book project is the right mix of history and fiction. And a lot of times when I do book club events, one of the, I think, questions I get every single time is, well, what part of this is history and what part of this is fiction? And I think that the best historical novels make it difficult to tell the difference between the two. And of course, one of my favorite sort of consequences of historical fiction or goals of historical fiction is to get readers to themselves go down those rabbit holes and decide, oh, I need to know more about this. I need to know if this really happened this way. And then they go and do other kinds of reading. The place that we all, I think, love fessing up to the dramatic license that we've taken is in the author's notes. Where you talk about the liberties you took and why you took them. And so that really gives you an opportunity to talk about what the source material was like for a particular person, where there were gaps in the record, where you had to take some dramatic license and why. But I think it's also important to say that I think the vast majority of us probably are writing historical fiction in the first person. That is, we're saying, I did this and I thought that and I felt this. The reality is that no historical record, even about the best documented person who ever lived, tells us about the interior mind of a person. And so when you're writing in the first person, you're assuming in the narrative that you understand everything that the person thought and felt. And historical novelists will always have to imagine that part of writing a novel. And so, you can sort of talk about why in the author's note, you decided that someone would have felt this or would have felt that. And so those are I think the really fun moments when a novelist really helps to make the history come alive by putting feelings and emotions and thoughts and motivations that are relatable and identifiable and at least something that you can empathize with, even if you don't always agree.
All right, thank you, Laura. I am now going to turn it over to Eliza, and I would love for her to answer. If you could choose 3 people to take with you to a deserted island, who would you take and why?
So this was a really fun question. At first I was thinking I would take my family, but there were 4 of them and I couldn't choose between them. So it just seemed unfair to choose any of them. And then I was like, what about like Henry Cavill, Chris Hemsworth, Sam Ewan? But that also seemed unfair to my husband, who I really love. And so then I thought, well, maybe I would actually choose 3 of the female Scottish rebels that I've just been writing about for my Prince Charlie's Angels series. The first book of which is The Rebel Wears Plaid, coming out this summer. And those books are based on like real Scottish rebels that lived during that time. So if I was going to be stranded on the island, I'd want to get back to civilization. And I think having some sort of badass heroines with me would really help. The other thing is, if we were just there by choice, I would really enjoy having cocktails with them and hearing their fascinating stories. So the first of which I would take is Lady Anne McIntosh. She went against her husband, who had sided with the King George in England, and she had sided with Charles Stuart, the rightful heir to Scotland, and so she raised an army of rebels behind his back. She led them into battle more than once, gathered coin, weapons, and all of that for the prince's army. And when her husband was captured by the prince's army, he actually gave her the stewardship over her husband's imprisonment, which was pretty awesome. And then the other lady I would take with me would be Anne Leith. She was a young widow who summoned the courage after the Battle of Culloden to gather bandages and supplies and treat the wounded on the battlefield, all the while there are, Jacobite soldiers coming through and just killing the rest of the wounded to get rid of everyone. And last but not least is Flora MacDonald. She was a lady who disguised the prince as her maid and got him new papers, secured a ship, and sailed him to the Isle of Skye, eluding authorities until the prince was safely out of her care. So that's what I would do. I would choose some pretty awesome chicks to hang out with.
Those sound like awfully good choices to me. So next up we have Carrie. And Carrie, from you, what do you think, with so many books currently focusing on World War II, do you see this trend continuing? And do you think that 50 to 100 years from now, we'll have a slew of COVID-19 historical fiction? Somewhat of a scary thought.
I know, these actually came in as two separate questions. And when I saw them separately, I thought, oh, I want to answer these two questions together because I do think that they're really interestingly related. And even though, so my current book, which came out in February, is set mainly in the 1950s because it's about Grace Kelly, and also a little bit in the 60s and 70s. My first novel that came out almost 2 years ago is about Kathleen Kennedy, and it is set during World War II. And I have to tell you, if anyone had told me 10 years ago that I was going to write a World War II novel, I would have said, you are crazy. But I was drawn to what is effectively a genre because of the character, because of Kick's story was so compelling to me, and I would have written about her during any time period. And, and I think that as I started to research about World War II, one of the things that I sort of began to learn about it, and I looked around at the sort of field of, really tremendous novels and movies and television shows set during the time period, is that it's really, there's an endless supply of interesting and fresh and different characters and stories and themes to be explored and mined during the time period. And it's a really multi-dimensional time period. I think we are always going to be writing about it, just like we are always writing about ancient Rome and the Middle Ages. I think it's the same. And I think, as for its popularity, all time periods have waxing and waning periods of popularity. We're having an incredible time of books coming out set during World War II, and that may wane, but I'm sure it'll never go away, and it will have resurgences in popularity also. If you might be able to hear my dog sadly growling in the background, I apologize. And I think that just like World War II, this time period of quarantine that we're all in will also in 50 years be an incredibly popular time period because it is also multidimensional. It's a time when we are all having a common experience. The whole world is having a common experience, but there will be endlessly fascinating and diverse characters and stories and themes to come out of the time also. So I hope I'm alive to see the beginning of the trend in those historical novels, because I think it'll be really, really interesting. And I'll get to be the old duffer going, it wasn't like that at all.
All right, thank you, Carrie. Next, I'm gonna ask Kate, how do you think reading and hearing stories from the past can help us understand the present and prepare for the future?
Well, I think really that historical fiction, besides what someone else has already said, in that it helps us want to learn about the past, it hopefully sends us down those Google rabbit holes to learn new things and to check out massive churn out biographies from the library that we might otherwise normally never have dipped our toes in. But it's also a way for us to examine issues of the present through a little bit of a lens that puts it at a comfortable distance. And I always like to think of it as if so many of us can be exhausted by thinking about the issues of today, because it is exhausting considering them. And whenever you have someone come up to you, whether it's online or even in person at a cocktail party, saying, like, let's have a, an in-depth, passionate discussion about women's rights and health care and poverty and all the things that are wrong in the world, you're kind of left going, it's like, okay, look at that drink. Oh, that's empty. See you later. And you're either off Facebook or you're, zooming across the room, madly pretending you saw someone on the other end, rather than have that discussion. But the thing is, when you have a historical novel and it's, it's well done, it will back you gently into a consideration of those same issues through the lens of the story. And I think about that because, I'm nosed down in all the research for the Rose Code, and all these things are popping up in there that I didn't necessarily intend to write about, in the sense that I'm going to make this socially progressive novel in the themes in which it explores. But the fact is that these are women who are living and working in this extraordinary time of stress and confinement also, honestly. And there are things coming up like, why aren't they paid as much as the men? And how hard it is to find birth control unless you can prove that you're married and that your husband gave you permission to have it. And how hard it is to get rationing. We can all, how hard it is to shop when under rationing, which we can all sympathize with. And these issues that are big modern issues still come up in stories of the past, and it allows us to think about them at a little bit of a distance, and it allows us to think about them in a way that doesn't seem quite so in your face as these all caps Facebook discussions can be, or even these, conversations of family over dinner that can get shouty at Thanksgiving. It's a way I like to think of it as like you are gently backing the reader into the corner where they're going to think about important things that are perhaps still issues today, but you're not doing it in such a way that you're, hopefully offending them. You're doing it in a way that is also entertaining them. So they become aware that the problems that people have faced in the past can still be the problems that people face today. And that's really the great gift of historical fiction, is that it enables us to see that underneath, maybe the fact that people wore funny clothes and they talked kind of funny and different from the way they do now, that they are still people, just like us, and that humanity has so much that is common to it and endemic to it. And that once you get past the outer trappings, that is the common humanity is what draws us into it. So I think that's what keeps us coming back to historical fiction, is that we realize how incredibly relevant it is still to our own lives.
Yeah, if there is anybody on this call that wasn't already sold on historical fiction, you should be now. Next up, I have a question for Alex, and that is, how do you motivate yourself to keep writing, especially when faced with harsh criticism or feedback?
Sure. So changing gears just a little bit. I think every author here would agree that in order to succeed in this business, or even survive in this business, you need to cultivate and grow a really super thick skin. Otherwise, you will fall apart early on. You won't make it. I found that depending on where that criticism and where that feedback is coming from, I have different ways of dealing with it. So if the critique is, or if the criticism or the feedback is coming from my critique partners or my agent or my editors, I have a 24-hour rule. So for 24 hours, I'm allowed to vent. I'm allowed to wallow in self-pity. I'm allowed to stomp around the house and tell myself they're crazy. They don't know what they're talking about. They're all wrong, and they just don't understand that this writing is fabulous. And then when the 24 hours is over, I sit back down at my laptop and I gather my notes. And I usually, probably 90+% of the time, realize that what they're telling me is right. Usually it's something I already knew, but I was kind of hoping that nobody else would notice. So that's how I handled that kind of criticism and feedback. Now, once the book is out there, once it's published and it's in the reader's world, that's a little different. At that point, I can't really change anything. I can't control it. That's out of nothing I can do about it. They're going to love it or hate it. So I don't seek out reviews. I tend to stay off the comment boards on Goodreads and Amazon simply because I don't find them helpful. Again, because I can't change anything. And, you know, it's the reader's book to love or hate at that point. So I can only focus on basically writing the next book and doing the best that I can with the book that I'm working on then. In terms of motivation, I find that really just comes from within. I wrote stories long before I had any hope or thought of publication. And I have a feeling that if I ever sold another word, I would probably continue to write stories because that's just part of who I am and what I do, and it's what I love. So being able to share my stories with readers is really just the icing on the cake. And so that's how I keep motivated and keep plugging through all the ups and downs.
All right, thank you. And now I would like to turn it over to Jennifer to answer what inspired you to write your novel, The Gown?
So, you know, I never come at the ideas for my books in a straightforward way. I back into them really, or really I stumble across them. And with The Gown, I actually had been fribbling away on another book idea and it hadn't worked out. And I sat down with my editor and my wonderful agent. Can I just as an aside say that the common factor that's joining all of us here tonight, the writers, is that we share the same wonderful, wonderful, I know you're blushing, Kevin, but you're wonderful, literary agent, Kevin Lyon. We love her so much, and we have a secret Facebook group for us, and you know, so we're kind of like sisters in a way, and so that's if you're wondering like what unites all these women together, it's that we share this wonderful literary agent who I credit for really everything good that's happened to me in terms of being a writer. So that aside, I'm going to stop embarrassing Kevin now. I just finished writing Goodnight from London, and it ends on VE Day. And the idea I had that motivated me was, well, what happens? What's it like to wake up the day after VE Day, you know, and clean up all the mess of the huge party that you'd had and get over your hangover and go, okay, well, we won. I guess everything's going to go back to normal right away and be wonderful. And it wasn't. The post-war period stretched on for years. The period of austerity in Britain after the war lasted longer than the war itself. So I wanted to know, what was it like to live through that period? But I also knew that 400 pages of just grandeur, depressing, gray, post-war England is kind of, you know, it would be like kind of indigestible for readers, and it needed a counterpoint. And what better counterpoint to that was the kind of the great national gathering in Britain after the war, which was the royal wedding. Princess Elizabeth, now, you know, the Queen, 94 years old, earlier this week. And her wedding in 1947 was kind of the first great national moment post-war where people could kick up their heels and feel happy and grateful that they'd survived and really have a good time. And so I knew it was in that intersection between, you know, post-war misery and stardust of royal wedding that I was going to find the story. And I eventually found it in the women who made the princess's wedding gown, who did the spectacular embroidery, because they were, every day they were going to work and working long hours over this beautiful gown. And then they had to go home to ordinary life. And get through another day of rationing and shortages and pipes that froze and not enough coupons to buy a new pair of shoes. So you stuck some cardboard in the shoes that had holes in them and just carried on. And that, you know, it was really inspiring to read about the people who lived through that period. And I have to say, I'm coming back to it now. You know, I'm working on another book. We're just finishing another book set during the Second World War. And again, you see the spirit of people who are just undaunted. It doesn't mean you don't complain. There's a fine art to complaining if you're British, which is known as whinging, which I think is perfectly acceptable under the circumstances. You're not whining about something, you're whinging. There's a real difference. But they would whinge and then they just get on with it. And they'd go to work every day and do what they had to do. And I have to say, I found it kind of inspiring whenever I've felt the urge to be whiny about what are, for me, very, very minor problems and difficulties right now. Like I have nothing to complain about. And going back and looking at what people have lived through in the past has been a very useful exercise in putting things in perspective for me.
Thank you. Erica, I'd like to ask you, what was your favorite historical fiction novel that you have read recently?
Well, for me, writing is breathing out, reading is breathing in. I always have to be doing both. And I was definitely a reader first. Ever since I've been a child, I'm just always in my nose in a book. And my grandmother, my Irish grandmother, got me into historical fiction years ago. And for me, I can't get enough. So I started Hilary Mantel's third book in the Cromwell series, the first day of quarantine. And it has taken every ounce of concentration I have. Like Kate said, my concentration right now is terrible. And this is sort of like 300, 400 level college concentration, but I stuck with it. I finished it today. I wept for Thomas Cromwell. He's a scoundrel. But she is phenomenal. Mantell has been nominated for the Women's Prize. She deserves it. Every single sentence in this 750-page book is important. Even when she describes Cromwell eating, the size of his plum is the size of a baby's heart. And then he bites it. Every single thing she says tells you something about Cromwell. And I read it and first I bow to her and then I say, why do I write? And then I bow to her again. And I hope it seeps in. If you haven't read the series, which of course starts with Wolf Hall and then Bring Up the Bodies and then this, even if you can't concentrate and it takes you a month, do it. So, yeah. Oh, and I bought this in Key West at Books and Books, Judy Blume's bookstore, right before the world shut down. So got to support those indies too. So.
Yes, an excellent plug and reminder to support as many indie bookstores as we all can. And now, Renee, I would like to ask you, what is one piece of advice you would give to an aspiring historical fiction writer?
So obviously, if you're writing, you have to read, you have to write more, but I'm going to share with you the secret sauce, or what the secret sauce was for me. I got the secret sauce from Barbara Streisand, who got it from Goethe. Obviously, none of us got it firsthand. But I was watching an interview with Barbara Streisand, and I had been really struggling with my career. And she quoted Goethe saying, at the moment of commitment, the entire universe conspires to assist you. So that was just a light bulb went off for me. And I finally made the commitment to my work to get serious about it. And when you do that, you tend to take different action. That might mean that you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, like I did to start writing before I went to work. Or, whether you're trying to finish a book, get an agent, get published, hit a list, you have to commit to the process. And when you do that, and this sounds all like woo-hooey, and I'm not that sort of person, but then the universe kicks in and does its part. And maybe you'll hear about an agent who happens to be looking for a piece of fiction that's set during the time period that you're writing in, or maybe you'll hear something that just clicks and you know that, I have to rewrite the prologue again because of that. And when you do make that sort of commitment, all your excuses, you take them off the table. And it's really, it's up to you to give all you've got to make your dream come true. And no one can take you out of the game but you. No one can say to stop writing other than you. So stick with it. Remember the secret sauce, commitment.
Oh, thank you for the secret sauce, Renee. That was great.
And Gerda.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Next up, I'm going to ask Stephanie. Can you tell us about a time that you had an aha moment during your research for a novel?
So I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. I feel a little bit underprepared following up after Renee. That was amazing. And they called it Camelot. Laura Kamoy mentioned that you have to, in first person, really get inside of that person's head and figure out, their motivations. And that was something that I struggled with Jackie Kennedy's story in the early days of her marriage, especially with JFK, because, spoiler alert, JFK tomcatted around and cheated on her like nobody's business. It's completely documented. And Jackie, this poised, amazing woman, had to put up with that. And there was one point, actually more than one, but specifically one where, she had just had a miscarriage. And JFK was in the Mediterranean on a yacht with his girlfriend, it actually took one of his friends saying, if you ever want to run for president and keep your political career, you better get back to your wife because this is in the news. And I just thought, Jackie, why? Why would you stay with this man who's treating you like that? So my aha moment was kind of came in pieces. One was talking to my grandma, who, of course, lived through that time period. And she said, Stephanie, there was no option. There was no divorce. It was not something that was done. You took it on the chin and you just kept on keeping on. And then the other part that really was an aha moment was Jackie, I think she really did have this deep love for JFK, and she had this hope. And this is a woman who endured so many tragedies that I think that this inner core of hope was something that really kept her going through all of that. And in this particular instance, it was the hope that JFK would come to realize what she was to him. And that did end up happening. It took the Cuban Missile Crisis and the death of their child for him, I think, to really come around. But he did. And that was something that really helped me get inside her head because that was a struggle looking at her life from my very 21st century, go girl power kind of thing, like, oh, Jackie. But then I was able to really get inside her head and hopefully make her story more authentic.
Oh, thank you, Stephanie. And now I'd like to ask Bryn, what is it about an era or a historical event that really inspires you to research it and write about it?
For my first book, which is Woman Before Wallace, it's set in the 1930s. And that era just, to me, it spoke to me so much. And can I just say the fashion as the starting point? Like, the fashion of the 1930s is astoundingly beautiful. And that really was, for me, that was how I got into that time period, was going to museums and looking at the dresses and looking at the fabrics and how things were constructed, and that sort of texture really just drew me in. And then, you look at the cultural explosion that happened between the wars, Art Deco, the music, really just, there was so much going on that just was so rich, and this really vibrant moment right before the world ended. And so for me, that really was what was just so interesting, was figuring out this era, this moment, and kind of being able to live in it for a little bit of time. So the book that I'm writing right now is the Russian, it's set just right before the Russian Revolution. And again, there's something about that moment of explosion before the fall that just speaks to me, and that seems really interesting. You've got Rasputin, you've got the Romanovs, you've got this opulence, and then all of it comes crashing down. I think that it's really interesting to look at empires and dynasties and cultures that, you know, reach this amazing height and then come, you know, come to the other side of the hill, so to speak.
Thank you. So to everyone on the call tonight, I know we kept you a wee bit longer than we were planning to, but after all, I mean, when you have this many great authors in one place sharing their secrets, how could we possibly end on time? Just not possible. So I want to thank you all so much for being here with us tonight. I'd like you to join me from home in giving a little round of applause to all of our authors for their time this evening. We're so grateful for it. I want to make sure that all of you know that you can support these fantastic authors by picking up some of their books. If you haven't already noticed, there is a fantastic link in the chat that will send you to a page that has links to every single one of their Facebook pages, so you can get one of their books. And of course, you definitely want to visit their Facebook pages because they will be answering some more questions there. They'll also be doing some really fun giveaways. So please be sure to check that out over the next couple of days. And just want to thank you all again. Please know that we are all sending you the very best wishes to stay safe and healthy during this unprecedented time. And I'm going to unmute all of the authors. So right before we kind of close out, they can just do a little wave and say goodbye to all of you that have been so kind to share your afternoon, evening, morning, anytime, whatever time it is, wherever you are, with all of us. So everybody say goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Stay safe, everyone.
Stay safe.
Have a great Saturday night.
Mwah.
All right, folks, this is us signing off. Everybody have a fantastic night. Best wishes to you all.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.